Hello and welcome back to Crypto Sapiens. I am your host, Humpty Calderon. And today we are talking to Khori Whittaker, Executive Director at ENS. We open with an introduction to Khori and his background in the education space, and then quickly continue with a conversation about the importance of communicating ideas and values about Web3 and DAOs to people outside of our circle of crypto enthusiasts and advocates. Khori says, we need to surface use cases that the world needs. And in addition adds, we need to create on-ramps with practical use cases. And then quotes ENS as one of these use cases. And I would agree. ENS definitely makes crypto a lot more fun. As our digital identity, it makes it more interesting and easier to use. We close the conversation on one of the latest proposals where the ENS DAO community voted to elect fund managers to manage the ENS Endowment. As usual, there's lots to unpack here, so without further ado, let's get started.
Sure. So Humpty, thanks so much for the invite, and happy to spend some time with you here discussing Web3, crypto, ENS, and all that's happening now in our world and in our space. But my journey here on the earth began in Jamaica. So I was born in Jamaica, West Indies, and pretty large extended family. My mom was one of 11, my dad one of 5, and all the families we traveled together for. So from Jamaica we moved to Michigan to Southern California. That's kind of where I grew up. I've always considered myself and seen myself as an early adopter. Love technology from very young age, and in college I studied economics. After that, I actually went into teaching. So I joined the Teach for America movement and taught 5th grade in Long Beach Unified in California for a couple of years. Eye-opening experience, and kind of set the tone for the next journey in my career. But after that, I worked for a startup in California, an education-related startup, working with colleges and universities to help improve the student experience. And I think I was employee lucky number 13, and did many things at that company, from working directly with students, doing consulting projects, started and ran the recruiting department, and ended up doing business development for them as well. And actually did some policy work in the education space here in Florida for a time as well. But at one point in my career, I decided that I wanted to create a network of schools serving under-resourced communities here in the U.S., but knew I wasn't going to go back and be a teacher again or go back and be a principal or that sort of thing. But how do I get the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to operate and run a school system? So I joined the board of an organization called Lighthouse Academies. And after that, I was asked to throw my hat in the ring to become the president and CEO.
Why don't you just keep telling us about that?
Sure. So in that role, running a network of schools responsible for mission, vision, values, and commercial real estate, where all of the students were, really strong and robust governance regime, a national governing board, regional governing boards, dealing with local politicians and influencers and that sort of thing. So it was quite a complex multi-state organization. And as you may know, charter schools, for whatever reason, are political and controversial here in the U.S. So a lot of action happening in that role. And I was saying, in the nighttime, right? Very interested in technology, very interested in where the internet was going. And when Bitcoin came on the scene, and then later Ethereum, I was super skeptical because of my prior experience with eGold and ePalladium. But one of the technologies that we were looking at, or I should say programs that we were looking at in the school system, was a student information system, right? And I started to think about, wait, how can you create a student information system based on distributed ledger technology, right? And around this time, Bitcoin was running up. I think it was December of 2017, maybe. So I started to dig into the technology. That was what I was really curious about, and just the potential use cases of having this permissionless, worldwide ledger that everyone can have visibility to and access to. Like, what is the potential of that? I started thinking about, in terms of the education space, putting badges, credentials, certifications on chain, kind of moving from a K through 12 space into a higher ed space and then into the career space and workforce, and sort of how do you certify that someone has achieved a particular goal or a certification, and thinking about the consensus mechanisms of blockchains and what that could do for an educational credential. Yeah, so I started to geek out about all those possibilities. And as I was nearing the end of my term at the last company, decided, you know what, I want to get into Web3. I want to get into the crypto space in a full-time capacity. So how do I go about doing that, right? So I continued to learn. Like many of us, I started to degen. So I went down that route and, made decisions I wouldn't recommend, but learned a lot, learned the importance of safety and security in interacting with these protocols. And so I made my way to Circle Internet Financial, the operator of USDC, and launched a research and sourcing initiative that they had. And then I noticed that ENS was looking for a leader, an executive director, and I already got my .e. I was actually involved a lot in domain trading in the early 2000s as well. So I said, hey, you know what? This looks like a great fit. So threw my hat in the ring, and 6 months later, here we are chatting.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the comprehensive introduction. I really enjoyed kind of hearing how some of what you were working on and contributing to in your traditional work kind of sparked an interest because of some potential applications there, right? I heard
Right.
you also talking about like educational credentials, which is something that I'm completely geeking out about myself. I personally, the lens that I explore that from, and maybe you've heard this terminology, is DIDs and verifiable credentials, right? And how you can do these self-sovereign credentials that are user-owned. I just think that this space is so rich and nuanced. There's just so many different ways to kind of use this technology to kind of support some of the systems in the traditional workspace, right?
Right.
And going to your point of like having your .e, I remember, I would say that my ENS domain was probably NFT number 2 or 3 for me. And so I don't know how much of a degenerate I was, because if ENS was one of my first ones, I was doing something right, I want to think.
That's right.
Right?
Yes.
Because I saw the value in that. I again, just having this like state of mind about self-sovereignty, about identity, about how we can communicate or reveal ourselves in this digital space. The whole idea of having a domain, a .eth address that signals my identity in the space, I thought was really interesting and fun. And the community was like really animated and excited about what they were building. Of course, there was collectors and degenerates just collecting way too many of them.
Right.
That is, to me, one of my most proud moments is getting my ENS, and I think I got it for 100 years. So I totally.
Oh wow! Yes.
I totally. I'm a big ENS maxi when it comes to my early on. So coming into ENS, taking on that role, give me a bit of a kind of an example of what did ENS look like when you were first coming in, right? Like, what were the conversations that were happening? Obviously, I don't think that the DAO existed, maybe didn't exist at the time that you came in. What did that look like? What were those conversations, and how do those evolve to eventually be like, you know what? I think we need to be a DAO.
Yes. So actually, by the time that I joined, the DAO had already been in existence for I think 6 or 7 months. Right. So the DAO started in November of 2021, and we just had the year anniversary with a little internet party a couple weeks ago. And then I joined in April, May of this past year, and What happened in the organization is that because you're getting this massive organization off the ground, so much attention and dedication and time and effort was given into making sure that the DAO was operating well, and running on all cylinders. So that was the bulk of the conversation. When I was coming in, how do we make sure that the DAO keeps going? And then now we started turning towards, okay, how do we start to advance the protocol? And then how do we do outreach and bring in the normies and bring in the newbies into the system? So a lot of our conversations now, the protocol has been operating for 5 years. The DAO was created and is running extremely well. And kudos to Alicia.eth, who is our governance lead, who is spearheading that effort. She's a phenomenal leader in that space. So now we're thinking of how do we make the protocol better, and how do we attract more users and attract more quality integrations?
Yeah. I think that's really the crux of it all at this point, isn't it? We have a pretty well-established core of people that have been in the space. They truly believe in what it is that we're building here, right? I think ENS certainly has been a leader in this space. I could probably count in two hands, maybe, to be fair to other projects. The ones that I would say are, just have been advancing in ways that are, really about decentralization, about building with community, just with the right values, right?
Yes.
ENS certainly being one of them. How do you think, I don't know, maybe this is too broad of a question, but what do you think it is that we're missing to really be able to spark interest, to be able to communicate some of these really complex things that we talk about in Web3, decentralization being one of them, so that others outside of our own ecosystem understand, oh, like that makes sense. And I say this understanding that ENS is probably one of the best examples of doing that.
Yeah, Humpty. So just the creation itself of a Web3 domain that maps to a cryptocurrency address, right? That's a huge step, a tremendous step. Just like DNS system did for IP addresses, we're providing that ease of use with human readable names. One of the major challenges that we have right now, though, is I think coming up with, finding out, surfacing use cases that the world needs and the world can actually use. If those use cases do not exist, we're bringing people in to an environment where there's just a ton of speculation, a ton of degening going on, and just a lot of confusion. So I think in our space, we have to start thinking about how do we create products, services, and on-ramps that have practical uses right now and today. One of the best use cases right now are stablecoins, being able to transact domestically, internationally, settle accounts quickly, at the speed of the internet. Like that's a fantastic use case. Another is the digital identity, and that's where we come in. But staking your claim and establishing yourself on the internet and using your domain from property to property. Right? So one. What are these use cases? We talked a little bit about credentials, right? We talked about transacting value. What else is there? And I have a ton of ideas about where we're going to go. But those things have to be in place. And then now, those of us who are creating and leading protocols, there has to be some of us that are outward focused and thinking about the normies, thinking about the newbies, and thinking about how to change our language. Change how we talk about these things so that it's accessible to the normie and the newbie. But I do believe that the first and best step someone should take is getting their ENS domain. Before you enter into the space, get yourself a domain, get assigned an Ethereum address, configure your ENS domain, and then start using it. And so in the coming months, we are going to be launching an initiative to really streamline the user journey, the customer journey for the newbie into this space.
I like that. I mean, that's exactly, I think, the unlock for this space into to start kind of like making this fun and interesting for people who don't understand or maybe don't value
Yeah.
the idea of decentralization yet, right?
Yeah.
Maybe
Yes.
for me,
Right.
even when I first came in, the idea of decentralization wasn't why I came in here. I first came in
Mm-hmm.
here purely as a speculator. I was like, oh, new asset class. Let me go ahead and play this
Yes.
market. But as I, as they say, had skin in the game, I realized, oh, look, honestly, there's some interesting conversations going on here. Let me
Mm-hmm.
join those conversations, be part of it, share my perspective, from my part of the world, maybe other things that are influential to me. And then maybe through those conversations become a part of something bigger than myself. And I think
Mm-hmm.
you're right. I think that there needs to be this initiative, this very intentional way of reaching out to people who are not here, not interested in the narratives currently at play, but
Yeah.
making it
Right.
so that it's fun and interesting to them, and then having that be the way that they learn about these conversations or become even more interested in them. You talked about
Right.
digital
And
identity being kind of that very, that being that like piece that like really for ENS is important to engage those members, those community members, those participants. How, I mean,
mm-hmm.
I would say firstly, two things to that. The first one, I have a friend who his way of on ramping people or onboarding people to the space was by gifting them an ENS. So bravo to him. You
Yeah.
might know who he is
Yeah.
Tony Herrera. He's been from the very early days, been one of the first that just like buys an ENS domain and gives it to someone as a gift. And that's the way that they learn about, Web3, crypto, whatever you want to call it. The other is,
Yes.
you're right. Like when we look at these alphanumeric addresses, and I think IP addresses are much easier to remember. When you look at these alphanumeric addresses as our public identity, that's
Yeah.
impossible. When you think about
Yeah.
an ENS as something familiar, something fun, something about
Yes.
ourselves, hopefully, that then represents that, but also, like I said, keeps it fun too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love this aspect of our community and of our culture, the gifting aspect. So kudos to Tony for doing that work. On our core team, we have validator.e, the OG ENS fairy, who is relentless about securing names and gifting them to people. Which I think it's just a fantastic thing to do. And again, something that I love about the ethos of our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I actually secured my wife, kid's name, as
Mm-hmm.
NFTs number 7 and 8. I did a little bit degenning between my ENS and then their ENS,
Yeah.
but not too long afterwards. Because I definitely look, the reason why I registered my domain for 100 years is because I wanted my ENS to outlive me. I wanted this
Yes.
idea of
Mm-hmm.
my ENS being that like vault of who I was and my activities in this space, and that my family at some future date can open that as a capsule and say, oh,
Mm,
look at everything that he did. I thought
yeah.
that to me really clicked. And I was like, that's important to me because of the uh, things that I'm going to be able to convey when I'm not here, right? And
Right. Right.
so the reason for creating their ENS was hopefully they thought it might be interesting. Obviously, they're not geeks like me, but at
Yeah.
least they have their own ENS secured as well.
Yeah, I love that, Humpty. I love that. You just made me think about photo albums of days past and how you would flip through your parents' photo albums and see all the milestones of their lives, where they traveled to, and then your birth, when you came around and flipping through the photo albums. So having this ENS domain on a blockchain and thinking about having your children's children's kind of scroll through and see your activities in the advent of POAPs,
Mm-hmm.
right? Oh, my dad was here at this event during this time.
Right.
Yeah, that's another really cool use case.
Yeah. So we're talking about ENS. We're talking about, the DAOification of the project because it wasn't a DAO when it first came up. And it
Right,
sounds like also when you came in, it was already a DAO. So walk me
right.
through the intention behind ENS becoming a DAO and kind of I guess from where it started to where it's at today. What are some of the things that have changed? What are some of the things that remain the same?
Yeah, yeah. So our founder, Nick Johnson, had the intention and the vision of creating a protocol that outlives him, outlives all of us. And a protocol that can be used by the masses, indeed a public good. And one of the best ways to, I think, embody the values of the ecosystem is to, give the protocol to a decentralized autonomous organization where you have the community caretaking, overseeing, governing, stewarding this public good, this public resource over the decades and centuries to come. So I think this was a key decision that really ensured the longevity and sustainability of this protocol. Mm-hmm. So where we are now is, and as I mentioned, Alicia.eth has done a great job of leading the charge here. We have 3 working groups in the DAO. There's the meta governance working group, the ecosystem working group, and then the public goods working group. So the meta governance working group is very similar to, if you were to look at the traditional world, the executive committee or the governance committee of a board, right? But it's responsible for overseeing the treasury management of the DAO, overseeing the DAO tooling, like what is the DAO tech stack, and then looking at policies, procedures, programs, but how the DAO operates. So that's the meta governance committee. And there are stewards who are elected to be a part of that committee. Mm-hmm. Then you have the ecosystem committee and working group, and that working group oversees and watches the entire ENS ecosystem and tries to support projects, founders who are building on top of ENS. And then you have the public goods work group, and this work group is responsible for supporting projects, founders who are working on projects that benefit the entire Ethereum or Web3 space. So one of the projects that were recently implemented was a small grants project where every month projects can submit applications to the ecosystem working group, to the public goods working group, and then all DAO members can go and vote on which projects should receive funding, right? So a really democratic process, distributed process to select the projects that the community believes best benefit the ecosystem and best benefit the public, the broader public goods. Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about this word public goods, right? Because I think maybe I hear it more than most, so I don't want to assume other people do. So maybe describe to me, what are public goods to you, just generally in terms of how you understand them, the way that ENS perceives them, and how does this working group kind of seek to advance this idea of public goods through grants and maybe through some other initiatives?
Yeah. So the public goods, the mindset that you have when you think about it, these are technologies that can benefit humanity, and that we believe everyone should have the ability to have access to. Right? And indeed, goods that should be supported by individuals, companies, organizations, governments, and sustained by them. So we believe that the ENS domain, that protocol, should be something that isn't held tightly by a particular corporation or for-profit corporation. It should be something that is kept, stewarded, governed by the masses, right? Because we believe it's a tool that can help and aid onboard, the rest of the world to this space, and that can help them interact safely, securely, and in a simple fashion with Web3. So Humpty, it's sort of a mindset when you're looking at this protocol. Like, this is something that should be in service to the masses versus in service to an individual or a particular, a small group of people. That's kind of how I think about it. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, I think I would agree. I think that, especially when we frame this from the context of ENS, I think absolutely this is a service that needs to be available for everyone, and to
Mm-hmm.
support the protocol, certainly, and if the protocol itself can support other ecosystem projects, even better, right? Um,
Right. Right.
so there have been a couple of proposals happening recently. By the time that this gets published, I know we briefly talked about that, but by the time this gets published, it's going to be long concluded. Tell me a little
Yes.
bit about the intention behind the current proposal, which seeks to, if I understand correctly, select someone to manage the funds of the ENS endowment.
Yes. 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 So the ENS DAO, all of the revenues from domain sales go to the ENS DAO. And over the last couple of years, there have just been a tremendous amount of value created, ETH and USD in the ENS DAO treasury. And so the meta governance working group responsible for the treasury, came to the conclusion that we need to have some way to safeguard the assets, grow the assets if possible, but use it in a more responsible way and not just have it sit there in the multi-sig and in wallets. So in the traditional world, when you have large amounts of assets, there are treasury operations that can seek to allocate your assets in stocks, bonds, real estate, et cetera.
So why don't you tell me about some of the proposals that have recently gone up to the ENS DAO? And really, one of these we've talked about. By the time that this episode goes live, it's probably going to already be concluded. But at least for context, the proposal seems to be around finding a fund manager to manage the funds of the DAO. So
Yes.
can you please explain, maybe from the fund's point of view, what funds the DAO has, and then the intention behind having someone manage those funds?
Yes, certainly. So the vote is on selecting an ENS endowment fund manager. So structurally, the way it worked is that the meta governance working group responsible for the treasury decided that they wanted to make sure that we were responsibly using the funds. Over the last couple years, as you may have seen with the tremendous growth with ENS domain sales, a lot of revenue has been generated. And we didn't want all those funds to just sit there. So what can we do to make sure that those funds are being used, safeguarded in a responsible fashion? So in the traditional world, you will have fund managers, you will have nonprofit organizations that create endowments where the interest and the revenues from those endowments are used to fund operations. Right. So that was one of the reasons why they decided to look for a treasury fund manager. And so there was a process where there was an RFP, and the meta governance working group interviewed several fund managers, whittled the number down to 3, and these 3 went to a public vote. So you're seeing a lot of conversation happening in the forum, in the DAO forum. You're seeing a lot of conversation happening in Twitter. But the community is trying to wrap their heads around how should a DAO engage in fund management, and what fund manager should we use? And so I know people are doing a lot of studying, and the delegates are trying to wrestle and figure out, okay, what is really the best path here to, again, safeguard the funds and use them in a responsible way. What's great about this right now is that, in contrast to some of what we've seen out in the media these last couple of weeks, like, this is a very open and transparent process that everyone can see. It's a public vote. It's a public debate, and that's one of the beauties of the DAO.
Yeah, and just for context, so anybody listening who doesn't know maybe what we're talking about, in the last 2 weeks, there has been a lot of fallout from centralized organizations, really kind of managing people's monies without their permission, right? Because this was not necessarily what was agreed, at least what some people agreed upon when they first put their funds in a centralized exchange. And now these organizations are just going away because they don't have the funds both for their customers, but also they don't have the funds to continue operations themselves. So the difference, it sounds like, is look, there is a need to be able to manage funds. Now, these funds are not necessarily funds of other people, but there's a funds of the DAO, and in order for it to operate, let's put it out to the community to be transparent about this choice that we're making, but two, to also participate in the conversation about how we come up with, that decision, whether it's should these individuals be the ones that lead this effort, or I think there was an option that none of these people should be.
None of them.
Yeah.
Right.
So the last snapshot page, the last time I visited the snapshot page where the vote is happening, it seemed like there were individuals leading and not the action of no action, right? So I'm not quite sure. Hang on, let me figure out what I want to ask here, right? Because I don't want to your kind of sense of who these people are and why should we elect them. But tell me a little bit about the way that you arrived at these three individuals being the potential, or organizations being the potential fund managers for the DAO.
Yeah. So I was not directly involved in the vetting. That was the meta governance group comprised of stewards that were elected by the DAO en masse. Right? But some of the things that I know that they were looking for was experience, cost, familiarity with DAOs and Web3. So those were some of the things that they were looking at.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I did see the names there, and I think for the most part, at least in the conversations that I read in the forum, it seems like these individuals have that type of experience, right? And it's wonderful to see that these individuals are rising to the call from organizations like ENS to say, that's a role that we want to take on. That's something that we have, a background in, and have a good track record of doing. So I'm really excited to see how that works. I guess to start wrapping it up, why don't you, if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about like what you see ENS in the next 5 years. I know it's really difficult in crypto where things constantly are changing, but in a perfect world, what does ENS look like in 5 years?
Yeah. Well, Humpty, again, we do see ENS as a foundational protocol for the internet of the future. I should say for the internet of today and the internet of the future. It's a foundational protocol for Web3 and has inspired many other domain services as well. But we do see ourselves as the leader, and we see ourselves as an organization that will be the on-ramp and the gateway to onboard the rest of the world into Web3 and all the fun that we're having here, right? So, you talked about ENS being a public good and a service that everyone should have. So ENS could stand for the everyone name service. So over the next year, we're going to have a campaign to attract the normies and the newbies, right? To onboard them in a way that's safe, secure, and simple. And the first step that they should take, I believe, is getting an ENS domain. Over the last couple of weeks with the fallout, I'm sure you saw what happened with a major centralized exchange that sent 320,000 ETH, I believe, to the wrong address. That would not happen, right, if they were using a human readable name. Because I'm sure what happened, a controller, VP of finance, possibly the CFO, clicked on an alphanumeric number, right? It looked right. It was on their whitelist, copy, pasted, put it over, press send, right? If they were using a human readable name, this type of error would not happen. And so the ENS domain provides for that safety and simplicity in transferring value. So over the next year, we're really going to want to be the place, the location, the on-ramp for the normies to get into Web3. Right. So that's over the next year, you'll definitely see that. And over the next couple of years, increasing the number of integrations that we have, and high quality integrations. So you may have seen over the last month, Coinbase released and announced their integration with ENS. And their integration is under a different domain, cb.id, which is powered by ENS. So that's another one of the sort of the tricks of ENS, that there are many DNS names that you can convert to have the same type of functionality and power as an ENS domain, like your .com, your .art, your .xyz. So increasing those, the quantity and quality of integrations. And my hope is that we can get into the Web 2 space, particularly with the Web 2 social media companies, and help them, right? Help them get involved and get into the space in a responsible way, and bring them over into the Web 3 space.
Yeah.
And looking out into the future, Humpty, I think any internet connected device that has a serial address, MAC address, IP address, should have a human readable name, right? So we can think about ENS being the everything name service coming up in the next 5 years or so. Mm-hmm. So starting with Ethereum name service, moving to an everyone name service, right? And then moving over to everything name service, and making sure everything is connected and named.
Yeah, let's not forget that ENS has subdomains, right? So
that's right.
We can definitely branch out from there the same way that traditional domains work, where if I have a domain, right, which I do, I can then stem all of my devices into that domain, right? So there's some sort of connection as well. And as much as I would like to buy a domain name for all of my devices, it might be a bit prohibitive. But I like the idea of, the subdomain structure that's available as well.
Yes.
I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And you may have heard that our name wrapper upgrade to the protocol is coming on board very soon, very, very soon. And this is the way for you to be able to control, to distribute, to free your subdomains so that you can hand it out to other people and they can use it in a trustless fashion.
Oh, that's cool. I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Because for my business ENS domains, I did give a couple of subdomains to collaborators, contributors, and I would love for that to be a bit more self-sovereign for them as well. So that's really
there you go.
Interesting.
There you go. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Well, the last question that I normally ask here is, is there something that has been very influential to you? It could be a person on crypto Twitter. It could be a book that you've read. What or who has been very influential in your own crypto journey?
Great question. Influential in my crypto journey. I think there are a lot of thinkers, philosophers out there that are pushing the envelope in terms of what can be and what's possible. I think most recently I was very inspired by the network state and Balaji's writings. And I think this is another area where ENS can play a very significant role in working with municipalities, towns, states, even countries, right, in supporting payments, identity, you name it. But there's so much possible. And as we all like to say, we are early. But those of us who are engaged right now in the community, creating, developing, we have a huge opportunity to build the future for folks.
And that's a wrap. If you'd like to learn more about Khori and ENS, you can find them on Twitter at Khori Whittaker and ENS Domains, respectively. And as usual, please don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast. It definitely helps us out a lot. And give us a 5-star review as well. It helps us to reach and connect to people like yourself to be able to access this content as well. And if you want to listen to more conversations like this one, please go to our website at cryptosapiens.xyz. Until next time, stay brainy.